Today, we're going to be discussing how to manage the academic job search, specifically understanding the faculty job market and what you want out of it. So the learning objectives for today are first to define types of institutions in U.S. higher education, to identify your top skills as they relate to faculty positions, to compare skills prioritized by different institution types, to explain how to identify an institution's expectations when they're reviewing candidates, to describe how to tailor application materials to a specific position, to recognize the outlook of the academic job market and how you will work with it, and finally to make plans for your next steps. And you can do that on your worksheet. So this is the worksheet I mentioned that I sent via email. I'll also send it again with the workshop recording and other resources. I recommend you use this if you kind of are new to thinking about the academic job search or you've thought about it before, to really help tailor your plans and kind of come up with a plan of action for how you're going to tackle the academic job search this year or in future years. So today we'll be covering 4 items in our agenda. First up is types of institutions in U.S. higher education. Second is identifying institutional fit. Third is applying to positions. And fourth is managing the job search. So types of institutions in U.S. higher education. We're going to start with a poll for the audience. It's an anonymous poll, and we're going to be asking a couple questions. First, have you heard the phrase R1 University? Second, what % of higher education institutions in the U.S. do you think are categorized as R1? And third, which of the following universities in Texas do you think are R1? So I'm going to launch this first poll. So the answers that you guys are coming up with is, if you've heard of the phrase R1 University, 77% of you say yes, 23% of you say no. We'll talk about what R1 actually means. When asking what % of higher education institutions in the US are R1, nearly 50% of you believe it's around 15% of higher education institutions, and then the majority of you think either 3% or 33%. And then when thinking about which of the following universities in Texas are R1, nearly all of you think UT Austin is R1. Many of you, 43% of you, 40 to 50% of you think Baylor and University of Houston are R1. Some of you also believe Texas A&M is R1. And then fewer believe Texas State, Southwestern, or Trinity are R1. So let's look at the answers then. R1 universities only make up 3% of U.S. higher education institutions. That can be extremely surprising to students who have studied at R1 institutions like UT Austin. There are 4,343 total higher education institutions in the U.S. that are classified as type of institution, and only 131 have been classified as R1. Of the institutions in Texas that are R1, there are 8, and the ones that I included in the poll were UT Austin, which all of you identified as R1, but University of Houston is also R1, which many of you didn't catch. Baylor and Texas State are actually R2, and we'll talk about what does R2 versus R1 mean. Texas A&M San Antonio campus is called M1, Trinity is called M3, and Southwestern University is called BAC. You might be wondering, maybe I knew what R1 was, but what does R2, M1, M3, and BAC mean? So all of these acronyms or abbreviations come from Carnegie classifications. And so some people believe or use these classifications to define the prestige of universities, like universities will advertise that they recently obtained R1 status. But that's not actually the purpose of classifications. That's just how they end up getting used by many people. The classifications were created by the Carnegie Commission on Higher Education's the Carnegie Commission on Higher Education to support their research and policy analysis to basically categorize institutions so that they could adequately represent different institutions when they were doing their research or advocating for specific policy in higher education. So the pros of these classifications of institutions are that there's a shared understanding, what institutions are R1 versus what are M1. And so there's a common language when you talk about institutions, and we'll be using that common language today. However, the unfortunate effect of the Carnegie institutions is that the fact that they list them from R1, R2, M1, M2, M3, it seems to imply to some people that there is value of some categories over others. And I really want to emphasize that we do not care about value. We do not value specific Carnegie classifications over others at Texas Career Engagement. It's really about what kind of university will fit what you need. So Carnegie classifies multiple types of institutions. So of the 3,400 institutions in the US that they classify, about 10% are doctorate granting, 16% award masters, 13% award bachelors, 6% award some bachelors and many associates, 23% award associate's degrees, and then 31% are special focused institutions. These can award any type of degree. They can include very specialized institutions such as a 2-year associate's degree in a business school to my alma mater, UCSF, which has a high research load, but is a special institution because it only teaches medical students and biomedical sciences. It doesn't have any humanities. So it gets classified as a special focus institution. And then there are tribal colleges, which make up 1%. So looking more specifically at doctoral institutions, there are only 418 institutions in the US that grant doctorates according to Carnegie. And they categorize it into 2 different ways. All the Carnegie classifications really depend on what are the types of degrees that the university grants and how many per year. For example, how many PhDs graduate each year from UT Austin? So what makes an institution R is that they award over 20 doctorates per year. So that could be a PhD and a doctorate in education, and that they also spend over $5 million on research every single year. Furthermore, they split it between R1 and R2, and how they make that distinction is more complicated. It involves a lot of different factors and principal component analysis, but ultimately they split the group into 2 sections. Universities with very high research activity like UT Austin, and universities with high research activity like Baylor. And then there are universities that don't award many PhDs each year, but award perhaps a lot of medical degrees or JDs in law school, or they have like a lot of doctorates but not much research expenditure. So those can be, those are classified as doctoral or professional universities, and they include some campuses like Texas A&M University Commerce. So when you get to master's institutions, they're classified by awarding over 50 masters per year and fewer than 20 doctorates per year. And then they further separate it into M1, M2, and M3. And really those distinctions are just how many students are graduating with masters every year. The larger programs like Texas A&M, San Antonio, or the local St. Edward's University are awarding over 200 masters per year, while medium-sized programs like Le Tourneau University award 100 to 199 masters per year, and M3 like Trinity award less than 100 masters per year. When you look at baccalaureate colleges, you can divide them again. So they look at baccalaureate colleges that have 50% or more of their degrees are bachelor's level compared to master's or doctorates. And they can divide them into arts and sciences focus like Austin College or Southwestern University, or more diverse fields. And that includes the local Houston Tillotson University. Then there are baccalaureate colleges that offer 1 or 2 bachelor's degrees or more, but the majority of their degrees that they confer are at the associate's level. And so they talk about mixed bachelor's and associate's colleges where they're still offering a variety of bachelor's degrees, and that can be universities like Hallmark University versus universities that are dominant by associate's degrees. That could be Midland College. Associate's institutions, there are over 1,000. There are 1,000 in the U.S. And the highest awarded degree will be an associate's at that type of college. So this is where it gets more complicated. There are 9 different categories, and they intersect 2 different factors. Disciplinary focus, is a university a transfer where students will get their associates and then move on to a 4-year university? Or is it a career or technical university where that's going to be the highest level of education many students will procure, and then they're going to be trained to get a job right afterwards? And then there's also mixed universities that cater to both types of disciplines. And then they're talking about dominant students, and they use not traditional, non-traditional, or a mix of both. And really what they're talking about is kind of where are the students going education-wise, what are their age, are they part-time or full-time? And so a full-time, younger, like early 20s student will be seen as traditional, while older students and part-time students are going to be seen as more non-traditional students. And Austin Community College, down here in Austin, is actually a mixed transfer and career and technical, and also mixed traditional and non-traditional. So they cater to a variety of different students who have different aspirations for their highest degree level. And then the last type of classifications are special focus and tribal. We're not going to be discussing these institutions in our workshop today, just because they can be very specific and hard to generalize, but I'll mention briefly kind of what they entail. So special focus institutions are any institutions where there's a high concentration of degrees in a single field or set of related fields. So there are many 2-year institutions that are meant to be sort of career colleges in the health professions or arts or design or culinary school. And then there are 4-year colleges, and they can be faith-related institutions, medical schools, engineering schools, business schools, art schools. And a local example is DeVry University, which is a business school in the Austin area. And then tribal colleges, there are around 34 total in the US, and these are defined as any members of the American Indian Higher Education Consortium. So I just reviewed a lot of different categories of institutions, but we are going to make it more simple today. And we're going to divide it into R, RT, T, and then we'll set aside special focus institutions and tribal colleges. That is more specific and something that would be better served in an advising appointment. So what we're categorizing research-intensive institutions are as any doctoral institutions that are at the R1 or R2 level. So remember, these award over 50 doctorates a year and spend over $5 million on research. And there's only 266 of these in the US. They make up about 6% of the universities. On the other hand, there are teaching-only institutions, and I'm including all the associates colleges, though some baccalaureate institutions are part of that. And these are institutions that have teaching only and no research, and these make up about 23% of institutions in the US. And then there's mixed research and teaching. And so this is an enormous category of 1,674 colleges, and it can include doctoral institutions that don't spend much on research or don't produce too many PhDs, but do produce some. It includes many master's institutions where there are master's degrees awarded and bachelor's degrees awarded, and then some bachelor-only degree institutions that do have research involved. So the main differences between R versus RT versus T is that research-intensive universities are R. They are heavy on research, that there is an opportunity to integrate graduate students and postdoctoral scholars into your research. There's more access to startup money and state-of-the-art resources, specific microscopes maybe, but there's also an expectation to procure large grants. So perhaps the RL1 grant that many STEM people know about, you need to produce secure a lot of extramural funding to support your research at that high of a level. There is a lower teaching load, so it can be 2 courses or fewer per semester for our schools, and there is an emphasis on prestige of research. Meanwhile, research and teaching schools are really a mix of both research and teaching. So they do research, but they're really going to be focused on using research to enhance the student learning experience. So if you did a master's versus, and then came here for a PhD, you might see how sort of the level of, independence and sort of difficulty of the research was at a different level in the master's versus what it is here at UT Austin. Or if you did undergraduate research, you kind of get a sense of what sort of projects can students work on at that level. There's going to be variable access to funding, including startup money and resources for research. You might not get an electron microscope at an RT institution. You have to really think about what are the resources that we do have here. There is going to be a higher teaching load of anywhere from 2 to 4 courses per semester, and a strong emphasis on high quality teaching in the classroom or mentoring through research. Teaching only institutions have no research involved whatsoever. They have an extremely high teaching load of 5 or even 6 courses per semester, and they often serve incredibly diverse student populations and are really catering to meeting those student needs. And there's a strong emphasis on quality teaching in the classroom.